S nimi alebo bez nich. S nami alebo proti nám.
To veľmi výnimočný rok.
Spolu alebo o samote. Teplo alebo teplejšie. Zostať alebo odísť. Tvoja voľba.
Dobrý večer, vážení diváci festivalu Jeden, svet. Prihováram sa vám po slovensky, ale už v zápätí, teda znamená hneď prejdem do angličtiny, pretože mojím hosťom je Ivan Krastev a ja ako moderátor, moje meno je Martin M. Šimečka. So now, Ivan Krastev who is my host tonight, is one of the brightest minds of political thinking in the world, I just say, and author of the excellent books, and mostly thinking about our world in terms of populism, but also all the regions from America through Russia and Europe, of course. And now we have a time when actually it's a perfect timing, because just some 2 hours ago was declared the victory of Joe Biden as the next president of USA, beating Donald Trump. So my first question is, Ivan, what does the victory of Joe Biden tell us?
Martin, first, great pleasure to be in this conversation with you, and I should congratulate you on the timing. I have the feeling that you are the one who arranged when the results are going to be announced, so to be the first to comment on them. Listen, if you see the results, and of course much more data is going to come, but at least for me there are 3 or 4 things that are worth saying. The first is that it was a historical elections, and this is how the American public saw it. The turnout on the elections was very high. By the way, Joe Biden is the American president who got most votes in the history of the United States. This is also due to the fact that the American society went kind of a much more populous. Secondly, you basically have him winning. He's going to have probably almost 5 million more votes than Donald Trump had. But it was also a very tense elections, and this is also an elections in which we still don't have Donald Trump recognizing his loss. So this is still the risk of this being contested elections. So this is also new for American history. By the way, Donald Trump increased his vote compared to the 2016 elections. So from this point of view, he lost the elections, but you cannot say that Trumpism was defeated in the way many people expected. And also this is going to have a huge in my view, consequences both for the world and for America, because it happened at the moment of an incredible crisis, but even this crisis was not didn't affect the way the Americans were voting. There was one figure that was important for me, and I want to quote it. Out of the 326 American counties, which has the highest percent of the infected people by COVID-19, 93% voted for Trump. So paradoxically, you believe that in a world in which COVID-19 is reshaping everything, it's reshaping everything with the exception of the fact that people don't change their vote. And I do believe it tells you a lot about the level of political polarization. And from this point of view, this is an elections that also can tell us a lot of things about the future of democracy, not only in the United States.
Yeah, that's actually a question I need to ask, because I want to show the viewers that you published a very nice long essay, which is in book, now published in Slovakia and in 20 other languages, Europa and Pandemia, Europe and Pandemic. You have written through March and until May in somewhere in countryside in Bulgaria, where you just escaped from virus, where you wrote about that coronavirus would shape the politics around the world. But now you say that that actually Trump got all these votes despite his bad, the bad ruling of the country in a time of coronavirus. So I think still it had no impact on his votes.
No, it has an impact. Listen, we cannot be counterfactual. To be honest, we don't know how these elections were going to look like if it was not for the coronavirus. Because, of course, the polling data for Trump was much better in March than it is now. What was interesting is that it was this extreme political polarization that is also one of the reasons America did so badly responding to the corona crisis. Because everything is becoming politics, and in a certain way, part of the problem of the Trump administration was that they tried to see everything through totally political lenses. Donald Trump made a kind of a party affiliation for many Republicans not to use the facial masks. He basically started openly to treat the facial masks as symbol of loss of liberty. And I'm saying this, and you know that he himself has been infected, and basically he had his difficult days in the hospital. But this impossibility for Trump to believe that anything could be more important than his political interests and re-elections obviously affected campaign. What it didn't affect is political loyalties. And interestingly enough, I do believe what America teaches all of us is that in these highly polarized societies, each side perceives the victory of the other side as the major threat for democracy. And this is why it was so difficult for any independent institution like courts or media to be taken as impartial. There's three things that happened in the last 2 days, which in my view are going at the same time to show that the strengths of the American institution should be taken very seriously. One was basically the way the Electoral Commission very quickly and in a certain way very toughly responded to Trump's accusation of fraud. But secondly, I do believe that it was in these 48 days that Trump lost his most important ally, the Fox News and the Murdoch Media Company, because it was the Fox News and Wall Street Journal and others media that was very friendly to Trump during these 4 years, who said, listen, enough is enough. You lost the elections and you should face it. So from this point of view, this was quite important. But listen, the story is still not over, because we are seeing what the newly elected President Biden is saying, and his message was about unity, and I'm sure that he believes in it. But what Trump is doing now, what he will do in the next weeks in which he's still the President of the United States, we can only speculate.
And you think that it could be dangerous, that he will refuse to accept the defeat, or that he will use these 2 months for some dangerous steps or decisions? What do you expect? I know it's difficult to be prophet because Trump is unpredictable in the...
Anyway, these days it's not difficult to be prophet because everybody is a prophet and nobody's basically remember what anybody is saying. So from this point of view, we can easily speculate. It's very difficult. On the basis of the tweets that he's sending, basically Trump is continue to tweet that he's winning big, that basically everything was a big fraud. And what really worries me is that he believes it. This is one thing to be cynical, to know that you have lost. And to be honest, he's almost 5 million votes less than Joe Biden. It's not only about Arizona and Georgia and so on, but he believes it because in the view of somebody like Trump, he never can basically lose fairly. I know, Martin, that you're writing now about sports. In order to understand basically Trump, I do believe that thinking in terms of sports helps most. And also part of his supporters, their mentality is much more as a typical sport fans. When your team is losing, it's never fair. It is always a plot, conspiracy against you. So I can imagine that he can decide to go to the courts. I don't believe that he's going to win in the courts. Secondly, I'm afraid that in the next 6 weeks, he can decide to do some radical things, saying, because I don't trust the Biden administration, because I don't believe that they're going to defend American national interests, this is why. And he can do things about Iran, he can do things about China that are going to have an incredible impact. But thirdly, this is not only what he'll do. I was always trying to see the American elections with the eyes of the people who don't like America much. And listen, if Trump is... Yeah, and you see the Iranians already commented, the Russians and the Chinese are enjoying themselves. Basically, this is a great entertainment for them. But the most important is that if he's not recognizing elections, should we then be surprised that somebody losing elections in Africa or even somewhere in Europe is going to say, no, everything was a fraud? So I'm afraid that we're going to have the proliferation of the contested elections. And this comes at a bad time because America didn't do well with the COVID-19. China did better. And now you have this political process, and particularly for people who are not following very closely, it looks that the country is in a big mess. But I'm also afraid that in the next 4, 5, 6 months, in which basically America is going to be totally preoccupied of dealing with Trump and the transition, some other actors out of the United States can do different things in different parts of the world, and you can be sure that America is not going to be there.
By the way, talking about Trump and sport, I mean, in this film, which the viewers of the Festival One World will see tomorrow, which is called Unfit, and is about Trump from psychological point of view. And there are people who talk about how he plays golf or tennis. He's cheating all the time. So that's, for him, is a very natural habit. I mean, to cheat. And of course, in order to win.
He's not simply cheating. He believes that everybody is cheating. The most interesting about Trump, if you see even his major ideology about America, when all other American presidents are saying, we have a high moral ground and so on, Trump said, listen, we are playing poker, everybody is cheating, and we're idiots to believe that we should be the only honest people on the table. So from this point of view, he's accusing Biden of doing things because he believes that he could do them. This is the problem. You always see the other one as very much being like you.
Talking about now the future, the Biden presidency, what do you think is the, talking about the world, who is unhappy about Biden's victory mostly? If you can somehow put in the country after country, for which country it is the world worst result?
Listen, it's interesting because I do believe that some of the people who are very much unhappy are some of your neighbors. I do believe that Hungarian Prime Minister very much betted on Trump's victory. It was
supported him.
No, he supported him quite openly. Even in the last 48 hours, the pro-government media in Hungary basically was insisting that everything is a fraud. So from this point of view, this was very strong, and they have a good reason to expect that Biden administration is going to have a totally different look at what's going on in Central Europe. On the other side, to be absolutely honest, obviously Central Europe is not going to be the major priority for Biden. The people who also should be unhappy are the Russians, because the Democratic Party was really furious in the way they believed that the Russians tilted the last elections towards Donald Trump. And even if this can never be proved, there is a very strong sentiment in people around Biden and in the Democratic Party in general that Russia was intervening, that it was meddling, and that basically this is something that Trump tolerated. The Chinese, it's not easy to see how they're basically getting what is going on. On the other side, they didn't like the Biden's policies, the Trump's policies. On the other side, they know that Biden's policy is not going to be much different on some strategic issue. Nevertheless, that the style obviously is going to be different. But what I do believe both the Russians and the Chinese like is America looking like a mess. I do believe Iranians are happy that Trump is out. In Europe, I do believe it was quite important, and the Europeans had a really legitimate reasons to fear that the second Trump administration could have really made splitting the European Union one of their objectives. So from this point of view, if there is a place, and you already hear this, where the government but also society is very happy of Biden's victory, this is Germany. Because Donald Trump was famous for when he was receiving European leaders, and this was, for example, the last time he saw the Polish president Duda. When Duda was leaving the room, he said, "When are you leaving the European Union?" And listen, this type of jokes coming from an American president are not innocent. So from this point of view, I do believe for Brussels, for Berlin, for Paris, of course, this was a very, very important change. It's interesting, basically, where Israel is seeing this. Israelis have been very close to the Trump administration. On the other side, Biden has a kind of a traditional relations with Israel. But the most important thing is that particularly if the Republicans are going to keep the Senate, and we will know this in the middle of January, because there are going to be by-elections in the state of Georgia, which are going to take place on January 5th. This is not simply what does Biden want. The most important is what he will be allowed to do in a situation of a divided government, and also in a situation in which even his own party is quite torn apart between the moderates and much more radical progressives. We also don't know what is going to happen to the Republicans. On one level, we saw that the electoral coalition that Trump created have been preserved and even increased. But on the other side, to be honest, Trump can decide to destroy the Republican Party. If you see his tweets that the Republican senators were not supporting him enough, if you now see his war with the Fox News and so on, now he's a bad loser. In a certain way, you don't want to be an ally of Trump when Trump is losing, because he's some of these old Croatian kings who, when he dies, wanted all his horses and all his wives to be buried with him.
Talking about Europe, I mean, especially Central Europe, you already mentioned that, but actually not only Orban, but also Kaczynski in Poland. I mean, Poland was, the close ally of Trump, also because, exactly as you said, Trump was very happy about the fight which Poland had with Brussels. Well, now, the Poland actually lost its basic and crucial ally, making angry all Europe. Orban, what do you expect they will do? Are they rational enough somehow to understand, okay, now it's time, we have to be more moderate and talking to Europe because it's the only ally which is left?
This is a very good question, and it's not easy. By the way, it's interesting because you're absolutely right. And President Duda, just 2 weeks before the elections, went to the United States, and he was the first leader that Trump met after the COVID started. So this is big. On the other side, of course, Poland is too important strategically for the United States. So even if you don't like Kaczynski, and I don't believe that the Biden administration is particularly happy with this government, you are going to be much more careful with them, because on foreign policy issues, on things like Russia or China, Poland is going to side with the United States. The Orban story is more interesting because while Trump was quite friendly with Orban, and as you know, Steve Biegun called Orban Trump before Trump, even the State Department during the Trump administration was much more ambiguous, and the reason was much more closer relations which Budapest developed with both Moscow and Beijing. So here is the question: what should Poland and Hungary do? The first thing which I do believe they'll do is to stay very close together. and try to find some other friends. By the way, as you know, the Slovenian prime minister was stupid enough to congratulate Trump in the moment when Trump declared that he has won, but probably his excuse is that Trump at least is married for Slovenian, so he should use this. But I do believe they try to stay together. Secondly, I do believe that they should try to renegotiate their position within the European Union. And if you read a very important essay that Prime Minister Orban wrote probably 3 weeks or months ago in Magyar Nemec, I'm not sure that I'm pronouncing correctly the name of the paper, you're going to see that while he endorsed Trump, he was preparing himself for the Trump's loss. And his basically message to the European Union was, listen, I'm ready to support European integration. I'm ready to support more economic integration. I'm going to support the Green Deal. I'm going to advocate for European army under the conditions that you do not go too tough on the rule of law. And I do believe this is going to be kind of the line. And the line is, this is talking about America, and I don't know to what extent the people who are watching us follow much of American history. But paradoxically, Poland and Hungary are positioning themselves very much in the ways the Southern states positioned themselves in the 40s and 50s, where, for example, the Roosevelt coalition was a strange coalition between the most kind of a liberal north and on the other side almost one-party states on the south, where almost 90% of the blacks were not allowed to vote for one reason or the other. So I do believe that Hungary and Poland are going to insist that for their countries, illiberalism is a way of life. I'm not sure that they're going to succeed because what is happening in Poland these days with the protest against the criminalization of abortion, what is happening with the COVID-19 in all of our countries, and basically some of the big difficulties that our health systems are facing, putting these leaders in a much more difficult position, because these people like the cultural wars, but they don't like a situation in which there are problems to solve. Many of these leaders, and I do believe both of them are talented enough, they know how to defeat an enemy, but they don't know how to solve a problem.
Yeah, and that's basically actually, again, in your book, it's wonderfully written when you write about that, how these authoritarians, they don't like virus and don't like pandemics and plague because it's very difficult to fight with them. You cannot choose the enemy as usually you do is a populist, but the virus is here and you didn't choose him, and it's difficult to fight him. That's a thing. I have to remind the viewers that there is a Slido where you can put your question and we'll reuse it later. And the author of the most interesting question will get this book as a gift. So that's just try to do your best. But until then, I would like to still. You also wrote about in your book about Europe and the pandemic, and the danger of nationalism, and while as if Europe, which was true in the beginning, was the state behaved nationalistic or protectionistic. They protect their borders and everything. But now it seems that Europe isn't it that Europe is doing a little bit better, even in this way. You said that this rule of law, now the European Commission adopted actually the suggestion that they will use it very much against Orban's or Kaczynski's will. So what do you think? Did European Union learn from pandemic for its better?
I believe that people were wrong when they tried to compare the closing of the borders and the type of the first nationalist impulse in March and April, when they compared it with the kind of a rise of nationalism during the refugee crisis. It was different. Stay-at-home nationalism was course, very much based on residence. It was not about origin. And listen, honestly speaking, when the governments don't know what to do, you're closing the border, and this is a signal that I'm taking the responsibility for people who are within my borders. But then, first, you immediately understand that economically closing the borders does not make any sense. And now we see the other side of it. Now this is easy to go from one country to another than from one city to another in the same country, or even from one street to another. Secondly, and for me this was quite important, obviously the COVID-19 is an opening for the European Union. And we don't know what is going to be the effect of the second wave, which is politically can be much more destructive. But there are three things about the first wave which was quite important. One is because of the first wave, and we have been doing quite a lot of polling with the European Council on Foreign Relations, Europeans suddenly understand how lonely we are in the world. There was a crisis in which the international institutions didn't work and there was no much international cooperation. Secondly, America was not present. Basically, Trump locked America down. He didn't lock basically the Americans, but he closed the country and it was not cooperating with anybody. It was not leading anywhere. Chinese was very aggressive, and people were really shocked to understand to what extent for them even the facial mask diplomacy was about power politics and trying to gain influence in the world. And then people start to realize, even people who normally are critical to the European Union, who have a much more loyalty to the nation states, they realize that if the world is going protectionist, in Europe, protectionism makes sense only on European level. I cannot imagine how Slovakia or Bulgaria can get protectionists. We don't have a national economies. And from this point of view, I do believe even people who normally are not going to put in a pro-European camp understood that basically the only way for the Europeans to be relevant in a much more hostile, probably the world of tomorrow, is staying together. And this is why many things that did not happen during the financial crisis, for example, the mutualization of the future debt and so on, happened now. And there was also a major change in the position, particularly of Germany, because German economy is different than most of the European economy. Germany is trading much more with the countries outside of the European Union than inside of the European Union. But then you look around and you can imagine how the tariffs are going up in the United States, in China, everywhere. So the real place where you can trade and where your economic development will go is very much going to be Europe. So I do believe that European Union has this moment, and when you put plus the new understanding that climate is going to be critical, that digital is going to be critical, and the only way for the Europeans to make a difference is to start to face the problems not of today, of tomorrow. So it's not going to be easy, because during the first round of the pandemic, the populists were the big losers. And as you know, I have this also argument in the book. Populism is not rooted in fear. It is rooted in anxiety. And anxiety is a very diffused fear. You fear everything. You basically want that people should know that you are angry. You look a representation of your voice and your feeling that the world is going in a wrong way. But when a real fear comes, when you fear being infected, when you fear dying, when you fear for your parents or grandparents, then you're not looking for populists. You're looking for competent government to protect you. So in the first 6 months of the pandemics, the Populist Party didn't do well anywhere. They didn't do well in Italy, where basically Salvini lost the regional elections. They didn't do well in Austria, where basically the far right was destroyed on the Vienna elections. But we don't know what is going to happen in the spring, when the economic type of anxieties are going to replace part of the public health anxieties. And from this point of view, the fact that all these infected people in the United States voted for Trump, regardless of the fact that he didn't stop the pandemic, can be a dangerous signal to the Europeans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's understandable. But however it is, whether for good or bad, I mean, is it the pandemic actually makes the event and the development much faster than probably it would be without that? Is it true? Do you think it is? What kind of phenomenon, except that you mentioned, you see that will change faster than without that pandemic if it didn't come?
No, this is exactly, first of all, I do believe this is the biggest social experiment in our life. And this is one of the things when basically I was asked by my German publisher to write a book so early on, my first reaction was, this should not be like this. But then I understand that this is the only way also to try to test your intuition about the world. And in a moment like this, either write early on or when it is over. The thing that you should not do is writing in the middle because it is too messy and too confusing. But saying all this, listen, for me, the pandemic is, I don't believe it was a disruption. I believe that this is like a person who was taken from a slow train to a very fast train. And many of the things that we see basically were there before. But we're not noticing them. For example, digitalization did not start with the pandemic. All these kind of Zooms and all these platforms were there. But suddenly we started to use them in the way we're using it now. Secondly, if you basically go and see what is happening with the global supply chains, even after global financial crisis, we knew, for example, that 180 of the major trade products in the world were very much dependent of the production in one single country. More than 70% of the exports come from one country. We knew this. But then came the pandemic, and we understand how much we need facial masks from China or certain medicines from India. And then we start to talk about how they should be changed and how the things cannot go like this. This is not that the pandemic created this, but the pandemic helped us to see things that had been there before. So from this point of view, this is a change. And also psychologically, it's interesting what happened. Because in my view, it produced two totally different reactions. There are many people who didn't like particularly the pre-COVID-19 world. They do believe that it's not a great world anyway, and I do believe for good reasons. But now when the COVID-19 came, we start basically just dreaming being back in the world which for us was normal. And this is part, this nostalgia for the pre-COVID-19 world is very much there. But on the other side, it very much radicalized the imaginations, and by the way, of different political groups. For example, if you are young environmentalists, and you really believe that the climate change is the most important thing, so you have been always dreaming all the planes to be landed. But you don't believe this was possible. And then comes the pandemic and the planes were landed. By the way, in March and April, the only profitable business, if you're in the air business, the air transport business, was if you have a parking for planes. This was the only way you can make money. Or if you're basically a radical nationalist in Europe, you always wanted to resurrect the borders between the EU member states, but you don't believe it's possible. And then comes the pandemic, and overnight, all the borders were resurrected. And basically the Germans resurrected the borders as quickly as the Hungarians. So from this point of view, suddenly also this was a message that many things that we believe were impossible are possible. And this kind of a balance between nostalgia for the world lost and kind of a dream that the world that can come, I do believe it's going to stay with us, and this is also going to change very much our politics.
Well, I agree, and I that's also the thing when the populists don't like the virus. But I see also that the imagination we are talking about, and now I just would like to touch Russia. It seems that Putin was all the time, at least recent years, was viewed as a man who had drive, who decided, who shaped foreign policy. Now it seems, don't you think that he seems to be in defend, in somehow without imagination? And there are a lot of problems around him, and also the problem of pandemic is in Russia. He doesn't seem to try to solve it. What do you think of the future of this man, of this country in next years?
This is a great question, and in a certain way, this is the first crisis of the last 20 years Russia went through in which he was not the national leader everybody was looking for. He disappeared. In the beginning, this was also, he simply disappeared. To be honest, it was the mayor of Moscow, Sobyanin, who took the top decisions, who basically pushed for this or that. And it was going very much to an issue which is important for me. People believe that authoritarians should like the crisis like this because it allows them to get militant, basically that they can easily basically concentrate more power. But the most important freedom every authoritarian leader enjoys is the freedom to decide which is the crisis he wants to respond to. Changing the crisis is the freedom which you basically want. And normally, these leaders like the crisis that they create themselves, because these crises are manageable, governable. You cannot be heroic with respect to the virus, because the virus cannot be defeated. At the end of the day, this is like defeating death. Listen, nobody has defeated death ever. Second, you cannot give the story of this heroic sacrifice and so on. You can say it, of course, about the medical workers, but in general, you try to convince people to do much more ordinary things. You cannot tell Russians, listen, in the way we're dying in a war, it's as important for you now to wash your hands 3 times per day, because this is this type of practices that are really helping. And I do believe this is why these leaders felt lost. And because they felt lost, also this kind of fear of that they cannot control the country anymore comes back. And this weakness goes on everything. I totally agree with you. We can like or dislike what the President Putin was doing, but in the last 20 years, he was on the top of his game. With a very limited capacities, Russia was overperforming, basically surprising. You cannot do it. But secondly, these people don't know how to share power. And for this crisis, you should share power. You should talk to medical doctors. You should talk to experts. You should basically try to know what you're doing and not doing. And as a result of it, and this is, of course, a very simple empirical observation, it is not by accident that some of the countries that did best in responding to the crisis were countries run by women. So you have New Zealand, you have Denmark, Germany is doing fine. Why? Because women first never framed this as a war. By the way, President Macron also framed it as a war. Secondly, because you have this level of empathy, which is critically important. In the moment like this, basically people want to know that you are together in this. And I do believe that as a result of it, it really creates a problem. It creates a problem for President Trump. And listen, he could be one of the victims of this virus. As I told you, we cannot go counterfactual. But I'm sure that he probably would have done better without the COVID-19 and without all these people dying and all this idea of the mess and the exhaustion. Brazil, see what is happening with Lukashenko. Not that it's not that people on the street only because of it. But listen, you know that COVID-19 is the most dangerous for people with the pre-existing conditions. And I do believe that you see the pre-existing conditions of many of the political regimes in the world.
By the way, I mean, that's also your remark in the books that this is a situation when the regimes can, they can look at each other and people in the regimes, which is doing better with the COVID. So somehow it's interesting that you can like and look. I mean, these are good. I mean, Chinese are good, but it's just not. But the others are too. As the democratic countries are good in dealing with COVID, the others not. So it's also a situation which is very unique, that we can look at the world and wow, so this one is good. Why? It also probably make populists who are not doing well with that weaker in front of the eyes of the people.
Totally agree with you. Because listen, as I told you, I spent March in April very much in a deep Bulgarian countryside. And people here are not particularly interested in international politics. None of them is getting sleepless of what is happening in China or in the United States. And then the COVID-19 came. And then you have the feeling that you're living in a common world, because every day They were comparing how many people are infected in Brazil, how many people are dying in Slovakia, there, and you compare. So if there was a dictatorship, it was a dictatorship of comparisons. And this is not by accident, but very different governments in March and April, in a very different situation, did the same thing. When Bulgaria locked down in March, there was less than 60 people infected per day. But why you're doing this? Because when you don't know what to do, and particularly if you're a democracy, better do what others do. Otherwise, your voters are going to ask you why you didn't do it. And from this point of view, I always had a respect for the Swedish decision, not because I do believe that they were right or wrong. It's too early to know who was right or wrong, but because they decided to do something different. Because in a moment like this, dissenting is a high risk. By the way, you can see this also with their own numbers. When the numbers went bad, with people dying and so on, people are saying, why you're not doing what others are doing? So this is, and as you know, and you have this also in a book, in this situation, it is not the nature of the regime. There's three other things that turn to be much more important for the success of the crisis. Listen, there are democracies that are doing very well. Taiwan is doing very well. South Korea is doing well. There are authoritarian regimes like China who are doing very well. By the way, Vietnam is doing well. There are three other factors that were most important. First, the level of social trust. People should trust their governments. They should trust when basically people are telling you this, do this or that. Secondly, there is the efficiency of the state as a whole. But thirdly, and this is the reason why the Asians are doing better than the Europeans and Americans, it's very important to have the experience with a similar crisis. The SARS crisis in Asia in the last 20 years prepared the Asian governments and societies better for this crisis than us.
Yeah. Coming back to Biden, well, he's very experienced in foreign policy. I mean, he used to be a chairman of Senate Committee for Foreign Policy and was a vice president with Obama. Do you think he understands now the world in a sense that he will be able to somehow bring America again to as an important decision maker in a foreign policy, or is just too old for that?
Listen, I do believe that, of course, he's a people from the world that has disappeared. All his political experience was very much based on the Cold War and the post-Cold War. And from this point of view, he's not the father of the nation. He's the grandfather of the nation. This position could be quite important for kind of a divided societies. Talking about, for example, the model of a very successful president who is a grandfather of the nation, this is Van der Bellen in Austria. He really made a miracle. Nevertheless, the distance between him and, for example, his young voters was there, because from time to time, grandparents are doing better with the young people than their parents. But of course, he's going to be in a difficult situation for several reasons. One is that if Republicans are going to keep the Senate, it's not going to be easy to convince them to play the bipartisan politics that he likes. And this is the cost of political polarization. And this is why the very high number of votes that Trump took should be taken seriously. It's going to be high risk for the Republicans to go to be much more moderate. Secondly, I do believe in a certain way Biden is buying time for American society, for the American political elite, because there is a major changes also in the Democratic Party. How is the face and what is going to be negotiated to be the new American progressivism is also not clear. There are going to be major differences, both on the left and on the right. There is one thing that struck me, and I could be wrong, and I'm very much interested on your view on this. When I was watching these elections, and like everybody going in some of the figures, opinion pollings and others, I started to believe that we Europeans are not understanding America very well anymore, because we always try to see basically American politics as different from Europe, but in a certain way, very much connected to European politics. And we are going to agree that the difference, for example, we are in a film festival between Europe and America when it comes to politics, is the difference between the Borgen, the famous Danish TV series, and the House of Cards, and all this, and our parliamentary system. But when I was looking at America today, both American conservatism and American progressivism is much more similar to what we see in the Latin America than what we see in Europe. American progressivism is very much a coalition of different minorities and others. And somebody made this point that probably Trump is the American Peron. And basically Trumpism is going to be the American Peronism. And it makes sense because one of the major stories that is changing in America is demography. Biden won in places like Arizona and Georgia, not so much because people changed their minds, but because the population changed. And part of the fear and the strong anti-migrant sentiments in the Conservative Party is not the fear that they're going to take your jobs. The problem is that they're going to come and to vote for the Democrats. And I do believe that this is a new, probably for us to try to see American politics much more in terms of how the Latin American politics functions, is going to help us better understand what is going on in the United States than if we were looking in the US, for good or for bad. I mean, it does not need to be a bad Latin American country, but the American left is much closer in its sensitivity to the Latin American left than to a classical social democratic party in Europe. And the American right, very native, conservative, but pro-business is very much what we know from Latin America.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, although I never would come to the idea that for the Latin America could be a kind of an image of the North, but you may be right. I mean, the thing is, when I looked at all this debate and I watched the debates of American intellectuals before the elections, and I was really struck by the emotions that were there. I remember that in Slovakia from 19s when Mečiar was here. But even then, I had an impression that American, people like me, they were in much deeper desperation than I remember myself in 90s somehow. And it was interesting. I mean, they were really scared. And I think there is some misunderstanding that we don't see Americans well or properly, but I think this is a very important remark. But I don't see the Slido questions because there is I haven't them on screen. They should have given to me, but I don't see them. So I will probably have to, I can't take them. I have one question. Did you follow the concerning Slovakia? Did you follow the recent events in Slovakia in a sense that there is a huge way of people from the highest positions coming to prison now, judges, policemen, even some politicians. Did you see it?
Yeah. And by the way, this is one of the interesting questions that is also about the United States. One of the funny stories, and you talk to a lot of Democrats, and they said, we expect Trump to leave the country, or we expect him to be arrested. And there is, of course, all this talk about that he also has money, basically, that he's owing to Deutsche Bank and others. I don't know, but normally you're never going to have this understanding in the United States. And don't forget that Trump himself was campaigning 2016 about Hillary Clinton, locked her, basically sent her to prison. This is also something that I found interesting. And in the European case, and Bulgaria is very much kind of on the border, because there were countries like Bulgaria in which ministers never go to prison, and there were countries like now Slovakia, but Romania was before it, that they go to prison. And this is interesting because the elites and the people, in the eyes of many people, went so much apart that you have the feeling that the elites, They don't depend on the public health system because they can go to private hospitals, hospitals or private schools. There is only one system which basically all the people share, and this is the criminal system. You're not going to go in a prison of your own. And in a certain way, putting people in prison is also the way to kind of renationalize the elite, trying to tell them that we are together. I don't know how this is going to work. And the problem is that all these kind of actions are very important, particularly if the public does not see them as selective. This was the problem of the Romanian case.
Yeah,
and also it's because there is only one thing that can be as dangerous as corruption, and this is anti-corruption. Because if you see how many authoritarians basically came to power on anti-authoritarian ticket. By the way, Mr. Lukashenko started his career as the chairman of the anti-corruption committee of the Belarusian parliament. So this is the problem. And I have an African colleague of mine who used to say, corruption, this is other people networks. So from this point of view, to convince the society that it is about justice and not revenge is very important. I don't know the Slovak case, so there is no references there. I only see that people go to prison, and when I see what these people have been working, I can easily imagine that there could be good reasons for them to be arrested. But fairness of the process is critically important.
Yep. Ivan, I'm very sorry. We have to finish, and I had no time to put the questions from Slido because I just they were showed me very late. Thank you very much. I mean, we could talk on hours about it. So I hope we will. Well, we can enjoy at least now for a couple of hours the victory of Joe Biden. Do you agree? We can enjoy it at least for a couple of hours.
Personally, I do believe we're enjoying. Probably there are people who are not enjoying it so much even in our countries. But I do believe that for the world, getting a normal person back in power in the most powerful place in the world matters. And from this point, people who can like this or that aspect of the Trump's policy should keep in mind that he was so unpredictable that he's as dangerous for his opponents than for his allies.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ivan. For the viewers, you can see this debate on the Vodka TV, so you probably know about it. Ivan, thank you very much. See you later sometimes, and hopefully physically, and come from Bulgaria to Vienna.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The American dream is dead. I will bring it back.
Who are you consulting with consistently?
I'm speaking with myself.
Donald Trump is like a practical joke that got out of hand.
I think I know more about the environment than most people.
He's the most documented liar in human history, I think, at this point.
This was the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration, period.
You're saying it's a falsehood, and Sean Spicer gave alternative facts.
Alternative facts? The fake news, right?
Sociopaths can be successful because they're con men.
He cheats all the time. If he's going to cheat at golf, you don't think he's going to cheat to win an election? You don't think he's going to cheat to break rules, to get information from foreign countries? My God, he just admitted he does it.
Is Donald Trump fit to serve as the president and commander-in-chief? I can answer that with one word: no.
These psychiatrists now who are trying to diagnose without ever having met the man.
Trump is a sadist.
I don't know what I said.
A misogynist.
He said, I wouldn't even let you suck my dick.
A racist.
Look at my African American over here.
He is not a racist. He's an asshole. That's different from being a racist.
It's so sad that so many people have let their worst side come out through Trump.
It's an anger-based vote. The system is rigged, and the system is unfair towards them. They're like, okay, give my vote to the orange man. Let's see how he does.
There are times in history when figures appear who are able to coalesce existing hatreds and anxieties.
I've never really liked the Trump is an idiot, Trump is a buffoon aspect of the anti-Trump rhetoric. I think it does diminish some of the real dangers he poses.
Trump has helped autocrats all around the world. These people are all fellow travelers now.
Mental health professionals have the duty to protect society if there's a risk to society.
To whom will history be kinder? Those who spoke up during the age when Trump rose, or those who were silent?
S nimi alebo bez nich. S nami alebo proti nám.
Je to veľmi výnimočný rok.
Spolu alebo o samote. Teplo alebo teplejšie. Zostať alebo odísť. Tvoja voľba